are. Welcome back. With the time fast approaching 11 o'clock, the UK is literally on the cusp of Brexit, of quitting the European Union. This moment is without doubt the biggest political moment, it's fair to say, in a generation. Once that clock strikes, the changeover happens, and our neighbours, friends, cousins, colleagues in Northern Ireland will be living in a new and changed reality. There is a degree of anxiety, of fear, sadness, maybe anger among people in Northern Ireland, and the majority of whom voted at the time to remain in the EU. So to discuss this and so much more, would you welcome, please, Northern Ireland's First Minister, Arlene Foster. Welcome to the Late Late Show.
Well, thank you.
And thanks for being here tonight. Did you watch this show when you were younger?
I did, and can I thank you for inviting me on a night when Johnny Logan's here, and you're taking me back to my childhood, and it's wonderful.
Are you a Johnny Logan fan? Is that fair to say?
I have to say I am, yes.
Did you have words?
Yes, we did, and I was able to stand at the side and watch him live. It was wonderful, wasn't it? It was really brilliant.
I think, Arlene, some people will be a little surprised that you're on the show or that you're here, maybe tonight or at all. What do you say to that surprise or that level of intrigue?
Well, first of all, we are leaving the European Union tonight. The United Kingdom leaves, but that doesn't mean that we're not still neighbours. And I wanted to send out a message that we are and will continue to be neighbours. And I felt the most easy way to do that was to come here and to be on your show.
And to say what to the people of the Republic of Ireland?
Well, to say that whilst we're leaving the institutions of the European Union, we're not leaving Europe, and we're certainly not leaving the island of Ireland, that we'll continue to have those neighbourly relationships. And of course, whilst today is Brexit night, we have the transition period to go through now, and there's much to do during that transition period. And
you being here in the Republic of Ireland, you being on this programme, broadcasting to the good people of the Republic of Ireland, is it comfortable for you? Is it a peculiar place to be?
It is very comfortable, and I've been made very welcome. And I have to say, it's not just, of course, the Republic of Ireland, because there are many people that watch this show, as you know, in Northern Ireland.
That's for sure.
And hello to my sister in Nottingham in England, who's watching tonight as well. So people all over the United Kingdom watch this show.
You mentioned that she found out that you were going to be on before you told her yourself.
Yes, and she said, she phoned me on the Saturday morning and said, I nearly fell off the settee last night, realising that you were going to be on the show next week. So yes, people watch it all over.
Let me talk to you a little bit about anxiety, if I may, about the anxiety of people who are worried tonight. A lot of people in the north of Ireland, north of the border. I'm talking about farmers and fishermen, students. They're worried, they're scared.
Well, I acknowledge that today. I was asked earlier on today how I felt about today, and I said, well, obviously, I was pleased that we were leaving the European Union. However, I was concerned also about the fact that obviously we're not leaving on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom. There are still issues to be dealt with in relation to Northern Ireland, for example, the trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I said I also understood very much the anxiety of people who wanted to remain in the European Union institutions and many people who had anxieties.
And how could you address those anxieties without saying that? It's one thing to say, I acknowledge them.
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is acknowledge them, because I think the Brexit debate has been very polarising, not just in Northern Ireland, but right across the United Kingdom. So the first thing to do is not to be triumphalist and actually to acknowledge that people don't want this to happen. I do acknowledge that. But secondly, then, to work with colleagues in the newly formed Northern Ireland Executive to make sure that we find the common ground between us all and that we work together to do that.
We've got much to talk about and the navigation of those choppy waters. We'll go to those in a minute, but I think people are interested here in you for a moment, and who you are, in the sense that, can you give us a sense of where you're from or where you grew up and life as a young girl in Fermanagh? Yeah,
sure. So I was born in 1970, so this is a big year for me too. This is a big year for me too.
In every sense.
In every sense. And born near Rosslea in County Fermanagh, which of course is quite close to the border. I think I lived about 2 miles from the border at a little place called Dernawilt Cross, and lived there until I was 8 years old. My father was a part-time farmer and a full-time police officer, working in Rosslea as a police officer. Unfortunately, on the 4th of January 1979, the IRA came to kill him. Thankfully, didn't succeed, and I'm very fortunate, and I acknowledge that.
They shot him.
They did shoot him, but I'm very fortunate that he survived for another 32 years. There are many, many people in Northern Ireland that lost their parents when they were children, and thankfully I wasn't one of them.
Yeah, and of course that pain on both sides of the community.
Sure.
You acknowledge that, of course.
I do.
In your role. But at 8 years old, there's nothing right about it, that visited on any family's house.
No.
You had to move.
Yes, we moved. We moved to Lisnaskea at that time because the advice was we either stayed and got a lot of fortifications around the house, and I think my parents didn't want us to live in that sort of an atmosphere. So we moved to Lisnaskea, which was further away from the border.
You were a teenager in 1988,
yes.
and you found yourself on a bus, and having had a little discussion with the girl beside you as to who's going to sit beside the window, you got the aisle seat, as I understand it.
No, I got the window seat.
You got the window seat, she got the aisle seat, excuse me.
Seat.
And that bus journey on this day we're going to talk about for a moment was another difficult day, to say the least, in your life. Could you explain to us what happened?
Well, I did get the window seat because for anybody that travels on bus to school, you know that if you get the window seat, then you can have a snooze on your way into school.
Okay.
So that was a much prized thing.
Practical thing.
A much prized thing to get the window seat. So I was sitting and Gillian was sitting beside me. But then our bus driver was a part-time member of the Ulster Defence Regiment and therefore was targeted by the IRA. They put a bomb onto the bus, probably thinking it would go off when he started the bus, when there was no children on it, but it didn't, and it went off when there were about 20 of us on the bus. And
did anyone die in that
No,
bombing?
Thankfully, no. Gillian, who was beside me, was very, very badly injured.
Yes.
And has come through it and is absolutely leading a very full life now.
I'm glad to hear that.
And Ernie, the bus driver, was badly injured as well.
When I was a teenager, and we're close in age, I recall listening to the news, whether it was the BBC or RTE, and one day a Protestant would be shot, the next day a Catholic would be shot, and this tit for tat every day, and it was shocking, and it was depressing, and it was desperate. Would the two incidents you've described, let alone the broader political landscape and all that entailed, did that inform the politician you were to become? Did that, if you like, entrench your views, your politics?
Well, I can't really answer that because I haven't seen the Arlene Kelly. I was going to say, well, that was my maiden name, of course. I haven't seen the Arlene Kelly who didn't live through those sorts of things, so I haven't lived that parallel life.
Sure.
But I'm sure that those things have been important in my life. The fact that we had to move home from a rural farm into a town and all the attendant things that go with that.
Yeah.
For example, my grandmother, who was in her late 80s at the time, came with us. She hated living in the town. She'd always lived in the countryside with the door open, and there was no way she could do that in the town. And she called the house that we moved to a box because it was small.
So is that those sort of things might inform then?
They probably do, and I think that they probably did. Yeah.
Let me ask you about Martin McGuinness, a man who sat in where you're sitting essentially a couple of times in the past before he died, obviously, and. How would you characterise your relationship with him when you ended up working together? Well,
we had worked together for quite a while. As you know, the power sharing institutions came back in 2007, and Martin was the Deputy First Minister then with Ian Paisley. I was fortunate enough to be appointed a minister in that administration as well. So I had been a minister in the executive for all those years when he was Deputy First Minister.
Did you like him?
I got on quite well with Martin, yes, and you may say that's very strange given his background and given my background, but I think we have to make choices, and to me, reconciliation actually starts with the individual. Yes, as leaders, we have to show that we want to move forward and do things differently for our children and to give them hope. But reconciliation has to start with the person as well. So I had to see beyond what he had done in the past. And I'm sure he had to look beyond who I was as well as a strong unionist.
Not only, the broader political landscape, but you had a very personal problem, if you like, or previous history with Martin McGuinness because of the funeral oration he gave. And could you explain to us what happened there and why that might be an issue for you? Well,
he gave the oration at Seamus McElwain's funeral, and it's widely believed that he was at the killing of, or at the attempted murder of my father. So that, of course, was very difficult to take in, that he would say that this was a man that should be admired. He went on to kill a lot of people in South Fermanagh. He was very young at the attempt on my father. I think he was only about 17 years of age.
And your relationship then with Martin McGuinness would have been coloured by that experience?
Well, I don't think it was coloured by that because I genuinely feel that I can stay in the past and think about the past and dwell in the past. And let me say this, I don't take away for a moment what people have been through. And as I've said to you, I've been very fortunate because whilst my father was attacked and whilst I was on a bus that was blown up, I survived, and I'm here today and I'm here to tell the tale.
You are.
Whereas others aren't.
And what a night you are here to tell the tale, because as we speak, at this very second, it's 11 o'clock, Arlene Foster. 30 seconds to 11 o'clock, I should say, to correct the record. So as we hurtle towards that moment, how are you feeling?
Well, as I said earlier on, I am pleased that the UK have respected the vote that was taken right across the nation. But I can understand that there are many people who will not be celebrating tonight because they feel sad about that.
Yeah. And I noticed that you're very keen to avoid any sense of triumphalism. Any sense of celebration, is that right? Or
well, no, I think that is right, because we have been there for 47 years.
That's the clock showing. Sorry to cut across. The clock is showing at 11. We are now in Brexit reality.
Yeah.
And we have been waiting a long time for this to happen. You were saying, excuse me.
No, I think that there's a lot of people who will be sad about it tonight. But I mean, you have to understand that when the referendum was called, it was called because reforms weren't granted to David Cameron. Reforms he was looking for in terms of monetary union, in terms of fiscal policies, in terms of sovereignty. Those weren't given, and therefore it went to the people. And I think people voted to leave the European Union because they felt disconnected from the institutions, and that's why they felt they wanted to leave.
I'm just curious to know, are you, ladies and gentlemen, are you happy or sad that Brexit has just happened? Could you give me an idea? You're sad, are you? You think it's a bad news story? But that's probably not surprising. We know how we would have voted, so I'm not trying to have a go, because no, but I just wanted to get a sense of where we are.
And I understand
you understand that, don't you?
Yeah,
and there's no aggression or unpleasantness about it. It's just they're just reflecting, I suppose, the mood. What's this going? You came in. One of the first things you said, you wanted to kind of almost, reach the hand out across the border as neighbours. Yeah. What kind of neighbours are we now that we're past 11 o'clock?
Well, the same as we were before 11 o'clock, Ryan, with respect.
Notionally, yes, but practically not at all.
Well, it is, because, of course, the communities that live along the borders will still be the communities that live along the border. They'll still have those relationships that happened. I mean, I, for example, in Fermanagh, work very closely with a group in County Leitrim. We're trying to get a greenway in place from Sligo to Enniskillen. We think that that's a very good thing to do, because that'll provide a cycle route and tourism.
A lot of people will disagree and say, no, everything has changed utterly.
No, it hasn't.
You now have this border down the Irish Sea. That's in now, in a sense. And we also have, the sense that Northern Ireland is leaving Brexit in a way that's different to the rest of the UK.
Yeah, we are, and that's something that we have to deal with in the next 11 months. And Michelle O'Neill and I were in Cardiff this week talking to our counterparts from Scotland and from Wales and from the Westminster government about what that would actually mean.
It's a weakening of the union, isn't it?
No, it's not a weakening of the union, because we're still in the United Kingdom's customs code. I think that was the difference between, if you like, Theresa May's deal and Boris Johnson's deal. But there are those regulatory differences, and that's where the issue will come.
But the fact that it's a border you didn't want must rankle a bit for you.
Well, of course it rankles. I didn't want a border put in place, and this is something that I must deal with, because what we didn't want to see was borders developed north-south, but we certainly didn't want them east-west, which is actually internal inside our own nation, which is wrong as well.
And do you accept that as a failure for you or the DUP, the way that
all
worked out?
I think there's much work to do in relation to how we deal with that now. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, says that emphatically there won't be any checks, and then I listened to Michel Barnier, who says something very, very different. So there's a lot of work to do on all of that.
Do you believe Boris Johnson anymore?
Well, he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, so we have to work with him, because he has a mandate.
Let me ask you a question. Do you believe Boris Johnson anymore?
Well, do you know what? I believe myself, and I have faith in myself, so we will have to make our own judgment as to what he does.
There's a sense that, and I'm going to put it to you straight, do you think that you were shafted by Boris Johnson?
Well, I wouldn't use that terminology, Ryan, but
you pick a word, and I will agree.
I do think it was hugely disappointing that he decided to go down that particular route. But look, we have to deal with that now. Yeah. I mean, we didn't ask for that, but we have to deal with that, and that's what we want to do.
Regrets?
I've had a few.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm not going to sing.
I was going to say,
I'm going to leave that to the professionals.
You can join the band.
No, I'll leave that to the professionals.
What would be your chief regret at this point with regards to the whole process?
Well, I'm sorry that when Theresa May called the election, that she didn't get a big enough majority to deal with Brexit in a more meaningful way, and we had 3 torturous years of negotiations where a lot of things could have been sorted out but weren't sorted out.
When you think of the majority of Northern Ireland voted to remain, How do you handle that? It seems like a peculiar place to be politically.
Well, it's not really, because after the referendum happened, and of course it happened across the United Kingdom, we don't take, when you have a referendum here, you don't take different pockets and say, well, that Donegal voted one way and that voted another way, so we're going to have to take that into account. So the whole of the nation voted to leave, therefore we have to respect democracy. But I do remember after it happened, and Martin McGuinness and I sent a letter to the Westminster government where we set out where we felt that there were going to be challenges and where we felt there were going to be opportunities.
Yes.
And that was really the basis on which we were working before the executive collapse.
Martin McGuinness resigned, as you know, over the cash for ash scandal, and it's a scandal, I suppose, that I don't know if everyone is up to speed with it necessarily, but essentially it's what's the figure, about 500,000, is that right? In terms of 500 million, excuse me, in terms of the subsidies. Is that what figure we're at the moment? No, we're not. We're actually at an underspend now because we intervened to deal with that whole issue. So there's actually an underspend now. There's not an overspend in relation. So there's a report due anyway, as you well know. There's a public inquiry report due. How are you feeling about that coming down the tracks? Well, I welcome the inquiry and I welcome the report for the simple reason that it became a very frenzied atmosphere in Northern Ireland at that time. There were some very wild allegations were being put forward. Let me ask you to settle a few questions. Was there corruption involved? No. Was there incompetence involved? No, there wasn't incompetence. Was there did you cover up any warnings? No. And lastly, do you think that you'll still be the First Minister after the report comes in? Yes, I do. And can I tell you why? Of course. Because I fundamentally believe there is a lot of work to do, and there's much to do in Northern Ireland. And I think that we have come through a heck of a lot of other big problems in Northern Ireland. If you look at, people have been shot, and the executive nearly collapsed over that. Welfare reform, a lot of other big issues came to the fore, and we were able to deal with all of those. And that's what the disappointment is, that we weren't able to work through those issues back in December 2016. I have one more question I want to ask you about the cash for ash scheme, which is, can you give us the ballpark figure of how much was paid out ultimately? No, well, of course, the scheme's still in existence. Well, to date, then? To date, well, I don't know, because I'm not involved in that scheme anymore. But you don't have a watching brief on it? We pulled it, no, because can you remember the last figure you heard? Well, you see, the scheme came into being because we got money from Westminster to put the scheme into being, so it wasn't coming out of a block grant. So you don't have a rough ballpark figure? No, I don't have an up-to-date figure, and you don't have one that you can remember the last time at all? Okay. I want to go back briefly, if I may, to Martin McGuinness, because when he died, you went to his funeral. Yes. How did your family feel about that? Well, I think they understood that I wasn't just Arlene Foster going to the funeral. I was going as the former First Minister of Northern Ireland. Did they ask you not to go? No, they didn't, no. No. And I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. And, you know, there are a lot of innocent victims who felt very strongly about it at the time, and I totally understand that as well. I lost friends over going to the funeral, but I still believe it was the right thing to do. When you lose friends in a situation like that, do they tell you, or do they just ghost you? No, they told me. Okay, and that must be pretty difficult, or do you just move on? No, it was difficult because, you know, these were people who I have known for a long time, but they take a different view in relation to this. I took the view that I had served with them in government, that I had worked with them in government, and it was only the right Christian thing to do to pay my respects to somebody who had passed away. And as I say, as a leader, you have things to do that you may not do if you were just an ordinary citizen, and that's why I had to do it. Well, you got a round of applause when you attended that funeral, when you arrived, and you subsequently then went to a GA football match, and again you got a round of applause. Does that sort of welcome from the side of the fence, if you like, that you mightn't expect applause? Do you feel that that's heartening, or does it bother you at all either way? No, I think it was encouraging. I mean, obviously I was apprehensive going to the funeral because I didn't know what sort of a reception I would get, because the executive was down at that point in time, and we'd had a very difficult election. It was very polarised, so it was I didn't know what sort of a reception I would get at the funeral. So I was apprehensive, but I have to say I was welcomed very warmly. Can I ask you about the DUP being opposed to, say, gay marriage and opposed to abortion rights? And, of course, as you know, we had referendums in this country for those rights here in the Republic, and Northern Ireland has now had them imposed by Westminster. And the first same-sex marriage ceremonies will be taking place imminently. How does that make you feel?
Well, I think that it should have been the Assembly that actually decided those things, and that Westminster should have allowed us to decide those things. And let's be clear, I think there was a majority in the Assembly for same-sex marriage, and I think it would have came into being. But I think it's wrong that it was imposed upon us by Westminster.
But you weren't there, so...
Yeah, well, we're there now, and they should have... They didn't intervene on a whole range of other things, Ryan, but they did intervene. They didn't intervene, for example, on our waiting lists that we have in our health service, where people are waiting years upon years.
So you think they pick and choose then?
No, they definitely did pick and choose in relation to those issues.
And some people will say, well, gay marriage it's about time it's happened, it's progressive.
Well, I can understand that, but I take a different view, and I think if we are a democracy, then people should be allowed to differ on these issues. But I think that it is important that the democracy should allow those people who are elected to take the decisions.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Could I get a handle on your opposition to gay marriage as a matter of interest? Why do you object?
Because I think marriage is between a man and a woman. I think there are other partnerships there, and indeed many of my friends are in other partnerships, and I mean, I just believe that marriage is between a man and a woman.
Okay, well, that's again, you're entitled to that, absolutely. I would just wonder if you were invited to a couple who turned around, a gay couple, and who actually love you, and say, will you come to the wedding? Would you go?
Well, it would depend who it was. If they were very close friends, I may well consider to do that, yeah.
You'd consider to do it, but you might not. Let me ask you then about the great irony in some ways about Brexit, that as we now know we're minutes into it, is that the conversation about a united Ireland has become intense. There's a sense that, certainly for the first time in my lifetime, there's a sense that this could actually happen.
Really? The first time in your lifetime?
In my lifetime.
Because when I was a toddler, it was always talked about.
No, talking about is one thing, but it becoming a reality is quite another.
No, I don't think it will become.
Do you not?
No.
Why not? Why are you so convinced?
Because there are many, many reasons why we will stay in the United Kingdom. Economic, social, political, cultural, all of those reasons will mean that we will stay there. Our National Health Service, which we're very proud of, which needs a lot of work at the moment, I have to say, Ryan, and what we need to get down to dealing with. So that needs to be dealt with.
Well, what if there was a border poll? What if there was a referendum and suddenly you're, if you like, outnumbered? How would you feel about that?
Well, of course, I would be absolutely devastated if I was leaving the United Kingdom, because I'm a unionist. That's what I believe in, culturally and politically.
Yes.
I'm very much a traditional unionist, as you know. Economically, I believe it's the right thing to do, so I would be devastated, of course. And I don't think, by the way, that it is going to happen. And if you're going where I think you're going, that's not going to happen.
Where do you think I'm going?
I think you're going to Paddy Keelty. Is that where you're going?
Well, I was going to say, because you did tell him in a documentary that if the United Ireland came to pass, that your choice would be to leave the country rather than live on the island.
Well,
do you still stand by that?
Well, I think you have to look at the context of all of that. And the context was that Paddy asked me, I went to Queen's with Paddy, he's the same age as me. He asked me that question about 27 different ways before he got the answer that he wanted.
I'll ask you once
Well, first of all, I don't think it's going to happen, Ryan.
Well, play the parlour game as a hypothesis.
But I don't do hypotheticals, and you should know I don't do hypotheticals, and that's why that was the wrong thing to involve myself in. I'm a Fermanagh woman. I love the place. I love Northern Ireland. I want to make Northern Ireland a better place for everybody, regardless of, by the way, your sexuality, your religion, or who you believe in or who you don't believe in. I really genuinely want to work with all of those people in the executive to do all of that. And that's what I'm determined to do. And, you know, just because we have different views on different things doesn't mean that we can't find common ground to move forward and to make Northern Ireland work.
So you're hopeful for...
I am hopeful, because I have to say...
There's a big coalition now, so
there is a big coalition.
Plate spinning.
And somebody asked me about a week before the deal was announced, was I hopeful? And I said I was hopeful, because it is my Christian duty to be hopeful. And I have to say it's hope that drives me on to build a better future for my children and everybody else's children in Northern Ireland.
We appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time.
Not at all.
Nice
Thank
to see
you.
you. Arlene Foster. Thanks, Arlene. Arlene Foster, ladies and gentlemen. Coming up on the programme tonight.